A few weeks ago on the channel, we had a video covering rebuilding strategies in your leagues. A comment was left in that video kind of wondering, like, how do you just stay on top of the league and dominate forever? And that right there got my gears turning that we need to do a video basically covering how to stay on top of your leagues for the long haul. So before we get to it, if you do enjoy this video, please leave a like, maybe comment down below any other questions you may have about strategies in your leagues. And who knows, we may even do a video on those as well. We are going to be taking you through step one, a startup draft, and basically taking you through every step of a dynasty league. So while not every step may interest you, the chapters will be marked, so feel free to jump ahead to the ones that interest you the most. But without further ado, let's get right into it. One of the hardest things to do is just to get to the top and stay there. So today, Chev, Zack, and I, one of our new contributors, is going to be diving in some of our favorite strategies to keep you at the top and constantly competing for championships. The first thing we're going to dive into is basically general strategy and, overarching themes that are going to ride throughout this entire video. My number one thing is to put in the work, do the research, stay active, research players that you're looking to acquire, who you're looking to avoid, keep it plugged in here at the Dynasty Rewind as needed to keep up to date on prospects and things like that. But the way I look at it is the most fruitful leagues for me are the ones that I spend the most time in. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm chilling there for, 3 hours a day looking at the waiver wire or trades I can make, but just being active and putting in the time.
It's great to listen to other people's strategy on how they do things too, but I think you also gotta learn what you do best and what you like to do and how you like to build your own teams. I think that's one thing that has really helped me be able to sustain some teams in that atmosphere. And then also, I think just like with leagues, man, we're all in COVID. We all decided to jump into thousands of leagues, man, and that really, really hurt me this last season. Like you said, 3 hours on the waiver wire. It was 3 hours for all the waiver wires, so you're not able to just focus on one single league or a couple single leagues rather than searching through 15 waiver wires. Because I guarantee you, I missed so many players to pick up this last season, and that really hurt me sustaining these teams to being great.
Yes, as somebody who's not in a whole bunch of leagues, I feel that the benefit from being in fewer leagues is even not so much research within your players and who's hot, who's not, but just cultivating the relationships within your league. Because you might need to finesse a trade here or there, and being able to contribute in the chat room and cultivate relationships that way, it helps too, because you're not just a guy on the other side of the phone. It's this is Zack or this is Chev. I know this guy. He wouldn't try and won me over, so to say. And I'm not saying that you're trying to do that, but just cultivating those relationships in that, research players, but research your league too. Know who likes what, who likes Eagles players better, who likes Dolphins players better, so on and so forth.
You got to know your league mates. And if you burn those bridges early in the league, you're screwing people over in trades, or you're just being ignorant in the league chat, like, people remember that stuff. I guarantee you, they are going to remember that in the future when you want to get that trade done. It's like, how about you throw that extra first, man? I know how you do business. How about that? So yeah, I can see that. That's a good point.
So I think the big note is, limit leagues if necessary to focus on the most important ones. Especially your cash leagues. You want to make sure you're focusing on cash leagues because you're not only investing time, you're investing your money too. And obviously you want to get your money back and win those leagues as often as possible. So general, like, put in the work, do the research, especially on rookies, making your drafts the most efficient as possible. Obviously a good thing. So moving on to startup draft strategies, we're going to kind of take you through the whole process and kind of get you as good as we can get you. So the first thing with startup draft strategy, we'll say, like, players to target. And I think this is something you have to kind of play by ear. Like a lot of the startup draft strategies that we'll talk about, is because a lot of players, a lot of dynasty players are going to target the youngest players possible, the new hotness, the younger players. And a lot of times, veterans who are still pretty valuable just kind of get left out in the wind, and I think that's where you kind of got to zig when others are zagging, or vice versa, however you want to phrase that.
You got to remember too, like, there's a lot of people that draft just to rebuild in the next year. I feel like that's a strategy that a lot of people use. Like, well, the draft's not going my way. Let's just work till next season. Which I don't understand, because if you're putting money into it, man, I'm trying to win now. If you win the league once, you're paying for the next 4 to 5 years, and you're set up to good to go for the rest of the league for a while. So I think you got to definitely go for it right from the get-go. I think just realizing too, sometimes the trades that you're trying to make in the startup draft, sometimes they're not going to work out for the future. So I know I'm not a big trader in startup drafts, but if I'm able to trade a first round pick for a second and third or second and fourth or whatever it may be, or just to move back in the first, like those players are not getting way more points than the guys I can draft later in the draft if I'm moving back a little bit. So if anything, I rather move back in drafts that are startups than move forward. But I am not the person to talk about startup trades because I can never figure out how to get those done. So I hope Zack has a little bit more advice for those startup trades than I do.
I actually am the guy to talk to about that because that's probably my favorite thing to do. Is I am the Bill Belichick of my leagues. I am always accruing more draft picks because if you hit on
Mm-hmm.
a second or third round pick in a rookie draft, you've set yourself up for success for the next 5+ years. For example, last year I drafted Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's maybe a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. We'll see what Detroit does upcoming in this draft, but that's a guy I can count on. I feel like I can count on moving forward to at least be a wide receiver 2, maybe a wide receiver 3, or a flex play. And that's a guy who last year in the rookie draft, you're throwing a dart at a dartboard. So in a startup draft, I like to use the first few picks and then see if there's somebody who's desperate enough. Maybe they want to move up 10 spots. You'll still have a pick, 10 picks later, but can I pick up an extra second round pick? Can I pick up a third round pick? What can I like to find the desperate owners, who, just what we talked about a few seconds ago, who is in love with a certain player and how can I capitalize on that? Because I think me personally, I don't think there's anything more valuable than draft capital in rookie drafts, especially in the first 3 rounds. We're seeing this year that there's a significant drop off in the second round of the rookie draft, but you can make the argument that you could find somebody, Elijah Mitchell, at the end of the second round or the start of the third round. So I'm big on trying to find somebody who's desperate in your league, who's in love with a certain player, and what can you get for it.
I'm one of those big players too that, I'm always trying to add picks, and we'll discuss that a little later. But, trading within the startup, I think you touched on pretty well. The big thing that I like to see, I think nowadays, is the cool thing is to always trade down, especially from the first round, which I don't think now that everybody's kind of on that wavelength, I don't think you can do it as much.
Yeah.
It used to be probably 2-3 years ago where you could trade down and just acquire disgusting draft capital for your first round pick in a startup. Like you could get a second and a third, and then you trade down to the fourth round or whatever it is. So you end up with 6 picks in the first 4 rounds, which is disgusting. And that'll give you a ton of starter depth right off the rip. Not as much these days, since everybody is kind of on that wavelength and they realize that not as good of a strategy. So it's almost like trading up is kind of the cool thing now. And I think eventually it'll kind of come back around where you can trade down again. But it's again, you kind of have to sense the vibe for how the league is going. Start a draft strategy, target the positions you want. I always say, if you want to target young players, but everybody's targeting young players, soak up the value for age with those aging veterans that are still very viable. Trading within the startup, obviously very nuanced and hard to do. Chev, I kind of lean with you where I'm not super keen on it just because I think more often than not, people are just trying to kind of bend you over. And a lot of the times, I see people throw like 10 picks into a trade, and I'm like, this is just way too much to look at.
Yeah.
Decline, whatever the case is. And then, trading down versus trading up, again, you kind of need to play it by ear and see what you could do there. We're moving on to the in-season strategy, what you kind of have to figure out and what you have to do to kind of take that next step if you need to. If you're one of those top teams out the gate, hey, wheels up, it's time to make some moves. But again, I think the biggest thing is going to be staying active, attacking the waiver wire, which we'll talk about in a bit. And Chev, I know you kind of want to discuss, I know you have a big, somewhat controversial take on, knowing where you're at and trading. So why don't you dive into that for me a little bit?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of the same as like rebuilding, I think too. Like you got to mid-season see like, hey, am I competing or am I not? And for me, if I'm competing and I know I'm going to be probably top 3, top 4, if I have a chance to win the championship, I have no problem with trading my first away to upgrade and get somebody that has been experienced. They're in the NFL right now. They're making plays. They're doing what they need to do and getting points on my team rather than being a draft pick and not really concurring or doing anything on my roster right now. So I'd love to be able to just trade my first round picks away and just get talent that is already doing something in the NFL than rather me getting the 9th or 10th pick and then maybe getting a Jahan Dotson, that pretty good player, pretty solid, but he's not going to give me any points this next season to help me win the championship. I mean, later on he could, but I'm always go for it now and try to win it all. So I would love to just trade my picks away if I'm higher pick in the draft and go for that championship.
Yeah, again, I'm a draft pick lover, but I have to agree with Chev. If you're on the brink, if you are truly, I would consider a top 4 team. Some leagues have 4 teams make the playoffs, some leagues have 6. But if you're a contender, if you're in the top 4, if you can make a move off of a rebuilding team, a team that's clearly out of it, it doesn't strengthen them really in the short term. You don't want to strengthen a team that you're contending with in the short term. You want to help out a team that's rebuilding, and it helps you in the short term as well. Yeah, all for it. Make a move and go for it, because like Chev said, you win the league, you've paid your league dues for the next 10 years. You absolutely go for it. So, but I also subscribe to the Bob school of trading, where I try to get more assets in the trade, even if I am close. Can I get a 3rd round pick plus the player for my 1st round pick? Can I get more assets back? Because I am a big believer in the Bob school of trading principle.
It's never a problem to ask for an extra piece. If they say no, hey, that's perfectly fine. We'll slide back. I'll accept the trade. That's fine. No reason not to ask for that 3rd or that 4th, whatever pick you're trying to get. Like, just go for it, man. And also, too, like, I do not recommend trading your 1st round pick if you're a bottom tier team. Please do not do that. That's not what we're saying here. You need to know you're a contending team. If you're on the bubble, it's probably not the best idea, because that 1st round pick could set you up for a while if you are a lower tier team. One more thing for the in season I forgot to say is, if those rookies are not going to be panning out in the very beginning, like some of these rookies have, like Jamar Chase, one-off, Justin Jefferson, one-off. Like, a lot of these rookies are going to be slow and steady through their first year. Capitalize on your league mates, maybe souring on them, and you can get them for a cheaper price maybe than what they drafted them for. So I think that's one thing that has really helped me, is just finding those league mates that sour on their rookies quickly and being able to capitalize on that sourness.
Trading, like Zack mentioned, that's my number 1 rule, is always get more assets in return. And like, Chev commented on, asking for that 3rd round pick is rarely a deal breaker. I don't think there's ever been a time where, I'll usually get to a point where I'm like, yeah, that's a good deal. I'll take another 3rd round pick though. And I don't think, maybe once or twice it hasn't happened, or maybe it turns into a 4th round pick, which, hey, I'll still take one of those too, because I can throw that into upgrade a pick later, go 2 for 1 to inchworm my way up a draft board or something like that. But, now that we're talking trading, trading strategy, let's dive into that. Like I said, always get more picks. That's so huge. And the way I look at that too is, the more picks you have on your team, the less picks there are to go around. It's a game of Monopoly with the draft board, essentially, is the way I look at it. And then you can almost set price on picks. You just got to be careful not to set it too high, because then everybody else is just going to undercut you, and you're not going to get any picks gone, and you're going to have 50 players to cut on your roster after every single rookie draft, which is obviously not ideal. But, the biggest thing for trading, I think, is to kind of be able to gauge players that are in the midst of their value changing dramatically. Especially, you want to get players before their values rise, and you want to get rid of players before their value dips significantly. A lot of players this last year lost a lot of value. I think like Ezekiel Elliott. I think Derrick Henry has kind of, unless he comes back gangbusters in the playoffs, I think he loses a ton of value. Players like that, Aaron Jones, you probably could have gotten a 1st pick plus a decent running back for before this season. a guy like that now just lost a ton of value. And, speaking on Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's a guy that over the last 4 weeks of the season exploded in value. He was listed as a wide receiver stash in one of our videos. And that was obviously before he, set the world on fire and was like wide receiver 8 down the stretch or whatever it was, something ridiculous. So it's always important to kind of be able to, if there's players you're interested in, keep an eye on them and look for the trends and things like targets going up, playing time, snap percentage. If they're all of a sudden getting on the field significantly more than they were earlier in the season, that's one of those things where that's a player you want to start looking at because their value is probably going to pop, something's going to click, and you're never going to be able to get that player for the same value again. And when you're looking at dips, for every player that rises, one has to fall. So usually if you look at a team and you kind of see A.J. Dillon was the riser to Aaron Jones's fall. And, the sad thing is A.J. Dillon's barely usable, in terms of fantasy purposes. I love him, obviously, but as long as they're both in that backfield, they're middling RB2s at best more often than not, and they're not super reliable. So when it comes to trading, we've touched on a little bit throughout the video so far, but what are your favorite kind of, trade strategies, your thoughts on trades, Chev?
I have been in the situation where I have way too many draft picks before, and like coming up to the draft, I have to drop some players just to make sure I can get enough people on my roster and the roster settings and whatnot. So if I'm going to drop a player, I am still going to try to get something out of him, whether it's a 4th or 5th round pick. Like I am still going to try to accrue some kind of draft pick rather than just dropping him to the Wolves and getting picked up and being on somebody else's team. It's going to work sometimes. It's not going to work sometimes. It just depends on how fast you need to drop the player. But I mean, this season I had to drop Van Jefferson, and this was before all the OBJ news, and I traded him for like a 3rd round pick just because I had to get rid of him because the roster size. And
Sure.
I felt good about it. And now that gives me assets to trade later on to sweeten the deal if I really need to. Like I said, I'm going to ask for that 3rd. Other people are probably going to ask for it too. And if I need to add a 3rd or a 4th to a deal just to get it done, that Van Jefferson trade where I was going to drop him anyways, that comes into a huge effect now that I have a 3rd round pick to just kind of use at my will to see what I want to do with it. I can either use it or I can use it in another trade moving forward rather than just losing Van Jefferson for free. So I know that's definitely one of my strategies when I'm just trying to offload some guys off my roster.
Yeah, and in terms of what you're talking about too, Chev, I've been in a position where I have a surplus of draft picks also, and that's where you can start using them to maybe move up the board a little bit. Find an owner who has a 1st round pick and maybe you don't, and say, hey, I'll give you a 2 and 2 3s for your 1. And see if you can find somebody who has an older roster, who may want to get younger, so on and so forth. So, you have to find a way to manipulate the youth in your league as well, because you want to make sure that your team is young. I kind of live by the 26 and younger rule when it comes to running backs because I just don't trust. I moved off Dalvin Cook this year, and I feel great about it. I feel great about that decision. Because I just don't see his value increasing or even staying put for the next 2 years. I see it decreasing. So, manipulate the youth on your team, but also in your league too. Find owners who may not have a young team and who may want that draft capital so you can move up, because I found myself in a situation where I had 5 3rd round picks. Well, maybe I can turn those 5 3rd round picks into 2 2nd round picks. Something like that to just get a better player at that point, because 3rd round picks are nice, but those are real shot in the dark kind of player there. So just try and see who's trying to get younger in your league as well. Besides, obviously you want to stay young, but see who in your league needs to get younger as well, and kind of pitch it to them.
I love that you mentioned the whole you don't have a 1st round pick, so let's try to package up picks to go get it, because that plays really well with the mentioning that you said before of trading away your 1st round pick to get players. Because so if you just kind of keep greasing the wheel and running the machine of adding picks, trading away your 1st round picks to get players to help you compete, and then using that excess of picks to trade back into the 1st round, maybe not a high pick in the 1st round, but still a player that's more likely to succeed than most 2nd round picks just by percentage. That's a beautiful system right there, I think, in my opinion. And then Chev, to real quick touch on your whole thing with, trading players before you dump them. That comes back to going back to before where you said know your league mates.
Yep.
Not that this necessarily worked out, but in a league with Pork, I knew he really liked Daz Newsome last year. I'm like, I don't think Daz Newsome is ever going to be anything. So I sent Pork Daz Newsome for a 5th round pick. Not that it worked. I ended up just being like, all right, well, if Pork doesn't want him, nobody's going to want him. So I ended up cutting him anyway. But it's one of those things where knowing your league mates, and in that situation, especially if you know a guy is really in on a guy, you can kind of manipulate that. Keep in mind when players make moves to trade for players on your team, if trades don't necessarily get done, make a little note, be like, oh, this guy wanted that guy. Keep that in mind down the road. Now that we touched on, kind of the waiver wire, let's dive into that a little bit. And me personally, I'm always somebody who I have no concern for my fab budget. Like I don't care. Elijah Mitchell was available in a lot of leagues when, he kind of started popping off. And I'm like, I have $200 fab, $200 fab bid, done. Don't care. If he's a starting running back on the San Francisco 49ers, I'm all in on that. And it wasn't necessarily $200, but whatever I had left already, I'm like, I'm not going to use this down the road. And I will say that did kind of bite me in the butt later in the season a couple times. But it was one of those things in Dynasty where running backs are hard to come by. And I'm not saying that Elijah Mitchell was available in a ton of leagues. There were plenty of leagues that I'm in where he was already taken. But I think that, I think everybody assumes, especially in the Dynasty content creator community, that leagues are just all 40 plus deep and it's a 12-man league. But I think there's a lot of guys that go underdrafted and overlooked. But for me, how are you guys when you use your fab? I'm somebody who I have zero concern for it ever. I'm pretty willing to drop the money the second I walk in the door. How are you guys when it comes to fab?
I think it depends on where your team is, really. If you're a rebuilding team, do you want to go out and take a chance on an Elijah Mitchell? Do you want? I try to turn that fab into draft picks. Like wait a few weeks, wait till someone like Bob has spent their entire load,
Yep.
and see if he needs $20, $30 for a 3rd round pick, 4th, whatever. It depends, but if you're competing, then you need that fab because Rashad Penny won you a fantasy championship this year.
Yep.
So it really just depends where you are as a team. I'm of the build where if you're rebuilding, you try and increase draft capital, move up around for $10. Say, hey, I'll swap you a 3rd round pick. I'll give you my 4th and I'll give you $10 fab, something like that. But if you're in a situation where you're in the top half of the league, I don't think you should be doing it. I think you should be using that fab in a situation like Bob says. If you believe this guy is going to be a starting running back in the league for the next few weeks or even few years, because this is Dynasty, you spend 90% of that fab on that player. I would leave myself a little bit of breathing room.
Yeah, and I think for me too, if I see that player like Elijah Mitchell that's out there and they're flashing a little bit, I'm gonna throw a good amount of fab on them. But also this season, I saved up in a league where I made the championship, and I was going against Garrett Price, and he was a little bit low on running backs, and there's a good amount of decent running backs left on the waiver wire. So I decided to throw fab on all those players where he had 24 and I think I had like 76 or something like that left that I just accrued. And Rex Burkhead, all right, man, you're on my team, $25, so he's not going against me in the championship. And then there were some other guys that didn't really do too much in the championship week, but I didn't want them to be on Garrett's team to help him win. So, I mean,
Right.
it could be a strategy for you where maybe you do save, and at the end, if you make it to the championship or playoffs and you're like, man, I don't want this guy to be in his starting roster, snag him, put him on your roster, grab him from the waivers, and who knows, it could pan off, it could not, but that at least I thought helped be when at the end of the day they didn't do anything, but it didn't give him the opportunity to score that Rex Burkhead week where he gets 32 points and you get screwed out of a championship because freaking Rex Burkhead. Come on.
Yeah, no, I think you touch on an interesting point with, fab competition. One little nugget of fab advice I'd give from the guy who spent all his fab on Elijah Mitchell in 2 leagues. The thing I'd say is never do like an even dollar amount. Never do like 10, or a 5 or whatever. Just
Yep.
always bump it up that little bit.
Yep.
My rule of thumb is set that like dollar barrier of like, say it's $10, and then I'll add $1 for me, myself, and then every team that I think is interested, I'll bump up another $1 because I think everybody else is doing that same thing. So there'll be some bids where I start at 10 and 10, quote unquote, and I'm up to like 17. And there's been a lot of deals that I've had or waivers go through where I'm winning by like $2, 5 or $1. And it's like, oh shoot, like somebody put in 15 and I had 16. And it's like, sucks, dude. Like, don't do that because that's just the natural mindset is to go with that even
Yep.
number. So just a
Great
quick
point.
quick little point there. And then you brought up, adding Rex Burkhead. I think one of my biggest flaws, I think over the last couple of years has been ruling out the guys that, and this is probably due to the fact that I think a lot of these guys don't pan out like Rex Burkhead, but don't rule out adding the Rex Burkheads because you never know what's going to happen. If these guys are going to get run on a team, Rex Burkhead has been somebody in the past who's with volume done really well. So if he's going to be the guy, utilize him. There's no reason not to go add the guy, even like you said, to play keep away, or if, running backs are hard to come by, you might be dealing with COVID, might be dealing with injuries, whatever the case is, bye weeks, if it's that time of year, don't rule out adding those off-brand running backs just for the sake of ruling out those off-brand running backs. Because in all honesty, you might say it's not sexy having those running backs, but for me, points are sexier than anything else. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. And then the last bit I'd add is, with the whole pick situation, is adding to flip is one of my favorite strategies. Like I would go try to add a Rex Burkhead who had the next highest fab bid. I'm going to go trade him for a couple picks, maybe a third and a second. Might be a little high, but after the first week of what Rex Burkhead did starting, you might have been able to get that.
I bid on Ramondre Stevenson because Harris has been banged up a little bit. He's getting a little bit of run. All I need is one game of Ramondre Stevenson going off to trade him. Luckily, the next week after I got him, he blows up. And I'm able to trade him away to one of our lower teams in the league. And I think I traded Rondell Moore for like a first-round pick just out of nowhere. The guy wanted him. So I'm like, hey, here you go, man. Let me get the first. Ended up being the 101. So right now I'm feeling ecstatic about that.
Wow.
Picking up Ramondre and just shipping him off this next week. So it's possible to find those players. You want to find those players the week before they blow up. And then once you do that, man, the sky is the limit for you.
It's one of those things where, you're kind of, then I think that's a more realistic way to turn fab into picks. And that's just because I think in a lot of leagues I'm in, people have that same mindset of fab isn't worth that much. So like I couldn't go trade 10 fab to somebody to upgrade a pick like you could, Zach, in my leagues at least. And I think that'll be, it could be where it's like a $25 might get me there. But I think most leagues, I don't think that would happen for me. Definitely not saying it's not possible because I think it is. But when it comes to that specific scenario, I think I'd rather add a player with fab to then flip for picks. And I think that's a good way to kind of keep the picks coming in, as many picks as you can, man, because I think the picks are really the key to long-term success in Dynasty.
Well, I just to respond to that, there might be some owners who are a little bit more judicious with their draft picks than with their fab because they have fab to spend.
Sure.
They may not have draft picks to spend.
That's a good point.
What you could do is, pick a player off the waiver wire with your fab and then offer it back to that player for a low draft pick and some fab back. Like, hey, give me $5 back and a 5th round pick. Again, we're talking about the very small details here, but these are ways to manipulate the league in the direction you want. Because if you're a contending team, you probably want that player. But if you're a rebuilding team, you want that draft capital because that's the way you're going to get better unless you can just overall destroy somebody in a trade. So it's the small itty bitty moves that stockpile over a season to where now you've got 5 third-round picks. And if you hit on one of those guys, you're looking good. You're looking good for the future.
Right.
So it's just and that goes back to the first conversation we had is knowing your league. Who really would trade a draft pick for this player? Who should you not even bother? because they won't. There are certain people in some of my leagues who just won't even respond, which they just don't trade draft picks. They don't believe in that. So it's knowing your league and how to maneuver it.
The season's over, championship's done. What do you kind of do in the offseason? First thing to look at is kind of how your rookie draft lays out, in my opinion. Because that's like the big thing that happens. Some leagues have waivers that are closed, which I think is odd, at least until the rookie draft. Don't love it. It is what it is. Every league's going to be run the way it is. My big thing with rookie draft strategy when it comes to that is just know the class. With this class is some people like it for the upside it offers, and I think that's fair. But I think, the fact that this quarterback class is not good, like it's very weak compared to, last year, even the year before, what we're looking at next year, in just two players that are, going to have that label of generational prospect attached to them, I'm sure. It's one of those things where know the draft, like this year in Superflex, if I have the 101, I'm trading back and getting a haul because I think it's still going to be the same thing where people go quarterback heavy early because it's Superflex, because you're supposed to draft quarterbacks early in Superflex, even though if they're garbage and backups on teams and not even starting till halfway through the season and maybe not even holding down a starting job for more than 3 years, it's one of those things. I'd rather trade back and get the positional prospect that's going to be sitting there at number 5 or 6 and chill with that. I don't know. That's one of my things this year, at least. Other years are going to be different because it's going to be better class, but I might be looking to trade out if I can't trade back in the same draft, trade into 2023, even though I think those picks are already pretty sky high for value. It's going to be interesting. I also always like to trade within the draft, always do a slow draft in your rookie draft so you can get a lot of trades done.
Yeah, I try to identify two things: what needs to be addressed on my team and what's strong in the draft. Because if those don't align, then we have a problem. Then I might be looking to trade back, see if somebody else wants to take this pick. It's about identifying what you need and what's strong in the draft. And if those don't align, then you need to figure out how to strengthen your roster through trades, through the waiver wire, or maybe it's going to take a future draft. It depends on your situation. So you have to make. I'm not a believer in like best player available. What is your weakness and how does it look in the draft? If you have a tight end weakness, it's not looking good in the draft this year. Nope. So you need to identify it some other way. You need to identify that position via a trade. So identify your strengths and weaknesses on your roster and see if those are realistic areas in the draft that you can address for the next year, because there may be some prospects at tight end, but those guys aren't going to develop for another 2 to 3 years, depending on their landing spots.
It's just remembering those players that maybe have got injured in the past season, that maybe their value has dropped a little bit, or maybe they get drafted to a team that isn't as sexy, but a lot of people are just passing on it for whatever reason. I mean, I did it with A.J. Brown. He was my number one player that I loved in the draft. Gets drafted to Tennessee. I'm like, you're kidding. Why would Tennessee draft this guy? He's screwed. But now he's one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. And I mean, he's just a baller. And I missed that opportunity because of that. I passed on him, even though he was my number one guy that I film watched. And that was a bad reason to not take him, because talent is key. And like with Jameson Williams this season, I think a lot of people are going to forget about him. They're going to think, oh, man, he got an ACL injury. He's going to be out for a long time, blah, blah, blah. Sports medicine has changed a lot over the last few years, folks. And Jameson Williams is going to be just fine, whatever team he's drafted on. So if I can play to that weakness in my league where they're like, man, he's injured, he's not going to help me in the beginning, yeah, I'm going to pick him up later in the draft and be very happy, just put him on my IR and just let him sit there for a little bit.
The one thing I'll touch on quick before we move on to the final segment is, Zach, I love your point, identifying your needs, what the strength of the draft is, and then, cultivating a draft strategy or trade out that works for you. I think the next level up to that would be seeing what your league mates around you could need. And then that way you could trade if, say, running back was the strength of this class, whatever, for example. And there's a competing team that maybe is losing one of their top running backs. I think you could go to them and probably get a pretty significant ransom for that 101, say you had it. I think that'd be the one thing I'd kind of add on to that already awesome strategy, just to kind of look around and see what other people need in the draft. Because then I think you can kind of also not guess the draft board, but maybe have a better feel for it. I think that would be, I still love the point by itself. That would be like my 2 cents added on top of that
Mhm.
dollar bill you already laid down.
Yeah, and look, if you can find running backs are always gold, right? Running
Yeah.
backs, even in superflex, they are very valuable
Yep.
for as much as the quarterback holds value in a superflex. So in a draft like this, there will still be people who want these running backs. Um, and it's not to say that
Mhm.
I don't. It's just that it's a gamble. And if you miss on the
Right.
101 at the running back position, that can hold you back for quite a while. So
Mhm.
I'd almost rather trade out of that, take one of these wide receivers who I feel you feel great about the first 5 wide receivers, even Jahan Dotson. I feel good about him wherever he goes. Obviously quarterbacks matter in that scenario as well, but identify somebody who may want a running back and say, "Hey, I'll give you this pick. I'll trade you back and throw in this, throw in that, throw in a pick for next year. Who knows?" If it's not a scenario that works for you, as a holder of the 101, and I don't believe in these running backs, I will be looking to see who wants these running backs and who wants it more, because it's just not a scenario. I think I use this analogy: squeeze the juice out of the orange. How much can you get for this? And try and get as much as possible, because if you can move back to the 106 and pick up another first round pick next year, that is a scenario that is very appealing.
Moving on to our last topic here, talking about the biggest mistakes you can make in Dynasty that can hurt your longevity of being a dominant team. Number one for me, always, has been overspending in trades, and specifically in trades that are the running back of the year new hotness.
Mhm.
This year it was Antonio Gibson. Last year it was Miles Sanders. And I spent in a couple of leagues a ton, a ton. One league I traded like Cam Akers, and I got Antonio Gibson and a first this year back, which I think is pretty decent value.
Mhm.
But like for Miles Sanders, I think I traded Chris Carson, Rashad Penny, and I think like a first round pick, which at the time, keep in mind, Chris Carson was actually still pretty good running back. That was 2 years ago. So, I mean, it's one of those things. And Miles Sanders did not pan out this year or last year. Uh, Antonio Gibson, I think, had a decent year, but still left people wanting more for what they either drafted him at or acquired him at trade wise. And, throwing these picks out and the depth I had, if I would have held on to Rashad Penny, I would have been at a better point now than I am with chilling with Miles Sanders and one last first round pick. It's one of those things where I think you kind of have to always have the future in mind as much as, you're kind of always looking to contend now, but like not overextending yourself and overspending in trades, I think is so huge, every year. And I'm sure there'll be a running back this year that does the same thing. We're 2 for 2 the last 2 years, and I'm sure there was one 3 years ago that I just can't think of. That there'll be a running back this year that all signs are pointing towards him being God's gift to running backs in 2022. But something, it just won't come to fruition because the buildup is too much. Something just won't work. It won't be that good of an offense. Take your pick. Whatever the reason is, it just won't happen. So my big thing is, don't overspend in trades. Keep yourself in the moment. Don't get big eyes looking at this new God's gift to running backs. And that'd be my big thing, my big, hindrance that I think you can really kind of mess things up a little bit. So what are your thoughts on that?
Trading for running backs is tough. I personally I'm not a fan of it, because you can get worked over in that pretty easy. And again, you miss on a running
Yep.
back, it's huge. It's huge to
Right.
miss on a
Yeah.
running back, and it sets you back. It really does in terms of your standing in the league. So I am a trader of the second tier running backs. In this offseason, I've traded for James Conner. I've traded for Khalil Herbert. I've traded for I don't want to call them second tier running backs, but they're the guys who
The
may seem,
Robins.
yeah, exactly. That's the perfect term for them, and they could be a Batman. We don't know.
Absolutely.
So it's a tough spot to be in, because it could work out for you, and it
Yep.
sometimes it does. I don't want to say it doesn't, but more often than not, you are over trading for running backs which is a position that loses value in a heartbeat. You're one injury
absolutely.
away from that player never stepping on the field again, or not stepping on the field for an entire year,
Yep.
which at running back is 5 years of a player's career. 1 year for a running back is 5 years for a quarterback. Think about that. So it's a spot where are you as a team? Can you get one in the draft? Can you stockpile on Robbins, as Bob put it? I think is the situation, because one of those is destined to step up in an injury, or one of those is going to have their Batman tear an ACL in training camp. So can you capitalize on those guys who are going to be significantly cheaper? And if you miss on a Robin, you spend a third round pick or whatever you may have lost in that trade. It's not as significant as a first round pick as in your case, Bob.
I think you make an awesome point there. Targeting those secondhand running backs, I think is a good way to put it, or the Robins, like I mentioned. And, because figure if you had Khalil Herbert, Tony Pollard, Justin Jackson,
James Conner,
James Conner, all of these guys were at some point RB 1s and 2s on a weekly basis, for at least 1 or 2 weeks at a time. So it's just one of those things where it's like, shoot, I think another point you nailed is the, trading for running backs that have such a short term value, but you're making a long-term impact on your team by trading for running backs. So I think, getting running backs at value, like a J.K. Dobbins, versus trading for the running backs that are supposed to be the new hotness coming into the year, I think would be a great takeaway. But moving on to you, Chev, what are your thoughts on, some big mistakes you could make that could really hinder your Dynasty League success?
Yeah, Zack kind of hit on it, and you hit on it as well, Bob. So, like for me, when I started out in Dynasty, I was trying to trade for all the hot pieces, all the hot names of like, God, I got to have this guy on my team. If I have him, I'm set. And then I ended up trading way too much away for that piece, and then they ended up being duds at the moment, and it just really ruined some of my team building moving into the next season. And I like what Zack said, man. Like, it's not always trying to trade for those big names while they're hot. You got to find those big name guys when they're maybe at their lowest value and get them while you can, because once they start playing again, their value is just going to explode, man. So Zack, I mean, what you did there was incredible, and that's what we should all be trying to do if we're competing. Find those owners that are just getting upset about these guys not playing well. They're injured. What the crap? They're not going to help me out at all.
Yeah.
What can I do with them? Because those are the guys you should be trying to acquire, not the guys that are Cooper Kupps who are just absolutely balling. And now you got to pay a king's ransom for them.
Yep.
And that's not the way to play fantasy football. And that's what really hurt some of my teams early on when I started Dynasty.
Get your hot players, your best players at a value, low risk costs. Not always easy to do because you're not going to be the only one trying to get in on those deals, and not everybody's going to be willing to move on at that low risk, low cost budget. Now, that was a ton of information to take in and digest, but I do hope it was helpful. If it was, please leave a like, maybe comment down below any other questions you might have. Like I said, who knows, we might even do another video about it. If this video was helpful and you're newer to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button and following us along on this journey. We have a ton of other Dynasty videos on the channel that can help you win your league and help you enjoy fantasy football that much more. If you have any questions regarding rebuilding in your leagues, well, lucky for you, we have you covered there. Check out the video on your screen. But that is going to be it for me today. I will see y'all in the next one. But until then, y'all have a good one.